Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, in its worst state an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government which we might expect in a country without a government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. And this week's opening quote comes from Thomas Paine. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maxwell Igan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I will be your host for the next hour. And it's nice to be back with you again, folks. By the way, if you're someone who watches these shows on YouTube every week, if you don't listen to them on American Voice Radio, if you actually wait for the YouTube version, well, what you're going to find on YouTube is a 15-minute highlight of the entire show with a link to the Crow House website below where you can go and download the MP3. Because YouTube has restricted my upload ability, I am now no longer able to upload videos any longer than 15 minutes. I don't think they appreciated my last show, which was about ISIS and the Greater Israel Project, and they seem to have limited my account as a result. So please bear with me on that one, folks. If you are watching it on YouTube, be sure to go and download the entire show from the Crow House website. I may attempt to upload the full-length version to Vimeo as well. I was going to go back to uploading 4 15-minute sections on YouTube, but I really can't be bothered. I'll just put a 15-minute highlight up there with a link to the MP3 and hopefully begin uploading the full-length show to Vimeo as well. So all that was just a community service announcement, folks, but back to this week's show. Now, is there an attempt being undertaken to reduce the human population to something of a more manageable level? Is the Earth even overpopulated? Is there a need to do this? Many people believe that there is such a need, but in any case, even so, is there a global depopulation agenda that is being implemented? I, for one, believe that there is, and I think there is an overwhelming amount of evidence to support this conclusion. And I'd like to share a little bit of that with you today. Now, in attempting to determine what's really going on this planet, it's important that people look at some of the smaller issues, although many of these smaller issues may seem to be quite major in themselves. It's important that people look at all of these issues and put them all on a global stage and step back and see just how things fit together. I mean, there is a very obvious effort being undertaken to homogenize humanity and to homogenize the business world and the social world into one manageable system which will encompass the entire Earth. This is, of course, being done because the world is constructed in such a way as to be a business. It's not really about people anymore. It's not really about the environment anymore. It's really about the business model. If you can think of the world as one big department store, with each country being perhaps a different specialty section, then you begin to understand a little bit more and a little clearer exactly how the world is run and why things are done in the manner in which they are. And you also begin to see how easy it is to discard large sections of humanity, how easy it is to marginalise different countries. You can marginalise them economically or with trade sanctions or even with war, such as we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment. But the important thing to understand is that it's finance and business that actually runs the world. Even the wars and conflicts that we have, these are usually over territory or resources, which is all based in the business model as well. And when you begin to understand how this business model works, you see how readily humanity is discarded and how easily humanity is discarded, and you see the various methods that this global depopulation agenda takes. Because there is most definitely a global depopulation agenda that is well underway. And depopulation takes many forms and can be carried out in many, many ways. It isn't just with the out-and-out killing of people. There are various ways to discard and depopulate certain areas, and the methodology that is often most employed by the powers that believe they be is the slow kill methodology, whereby people don't really realise that they're being depopulated. They don't realise that they're being exterminated because it's done over such a slow and lengthy period. And when I say a slow and lengthy period, I mean these are very, very long time frames. Some of the plans of the so-called ruling elite span over generations, folks. They really have no problem with time, and they have no problem doing things in a gradualist manner, because it's much more easy to get things done if you do them so gradually that people don't realise what's going on around them. And this has been the way the depopulation agenda has been carried out. Now, one of the main tools that they're using in depopulation is, of course, food. I would bear in mind that there was a national security memorandum that was put out about 1979 or perhaps even 1974 by Henry Kissinger, where he actually said that they will use food as a weapon. And when statements like this are made, often people think, oh, they're going to starve out certain sections, they're going to marginalise certain sections of the population by depriving them of food, by limiting imports and things like this. But it's not just like that, folks. It's by using the actual food itself as a weapon. And they do this through the genetic modification of food. So they can introduce food to a certain area which looks good, but which contains virtually zero nutritional value. And while people are eating this food and it's maintaining their weight, and it looks good on the surface and it tastes good and the people look fat and plump, they're actually not getting any nutrients, and they start to deteriorate from the inside out. And there's also certain foods that have been introduced which actually cause sterility. You'll notice in India has always been a place where the population has been quite out of control. Enormous population growths in countries such as India, and these are largely vegetarian cultures as well. What's happened is that Monsanto has gotten in there, it's introduced GM food, and as a result we're actually seeing fertility clinics start to open in India because people are having a very hard time having children. This is, of course, since they began eating GM food, because GM food is known to cause sterility over successive generations. Tests have been done on various animals, especially rats, and every single animal that's been tested with GM food has failed to produce offspring after consuming GM food for 3 generations. This is how the depopulation agenda is being pushed forth, folks, by simply preventing people from breeding via forced sterilization via genetically modified and essentially contaminated food. And this was what Kissinger meant when he said they would be using food as a weapon. And indeed, they already are. And it's not just in India, it's happening in the Western world as well. Anybody who eats GM food is going to find that their children and their children's children have a very difficult time producing children. This is why GM food must definitely be labelled, folks. This is why everyone's pushing for GM food to be labelled, and it's of course why the government doesn't want to label GM food. Oh no, it's all good. It's all being done in your best interests. That's what they tell us, folks. We modify this stuff because God made a mistake. But folks, GM food, a lot of this food is actually insect resistant. Think about that. You get a bowl of salad and you put it out there on the table outside, and there's birds and insects and everything everywhere, and nothing will come and eat your salad. Normally, if you were to put food out on the table, within a few minutes there'd be a flock of birds gathered around it, picking at all the vegetables, eating them all. There'd be ants crawling into the bowl. But you can put a bowl of GM salad outside, folks, and nothing will eat it. Nothing at all. And yet they tell us that it's safe for human consumption. But insect-resistant crops, folks, these are crops that insects won't eat. These are crops that nothing else will eat because they know that there's something terribly wrong with this food. These are actually foods and crops that in many cases actually produce their own insecticides, folks. So you're eating a food, a salad vegetable, which actually produces insecticide. They say, it's in acceptable levels for human consumption. But what is an acceptable level of consumption of insecticide? Folks, this stuff shouldn't be consumed in even tiny portions. That's the way it is. It's the same with fluoride. There's been tests that have been done with fluoride that show that it actually causes cell damage in as little as 3 parts per million. And even as little as 1 part per million, you start to see cell activity greatly decreased. You start to see cells committing suicide. You start to see all sorts of problems develop in the human body with tiny doses of these things, and this is all part of the depopulation agenda. And they do it in a very clever fashion, folks. They marginalise certain sections of the population financially. They force people into situations of hardship by forcing people to pay to be alive. They continue to put the price of everything up, and then people are forced to spend less and less on the quality of their food. So they're forced to buy cheaper and cheaper food. They get down to these supermarkets and eventually they're buying the generic brands and no-name brands, and all of these things are genetically modified. So they're forced upon the low financial achievers, because obviously the low financial achievers are people who are not prepared to get out there and put their nose at the grindstone and exploit their fellow man in order to survive. And so they're not sociopaths, and so these are the ones we want to get rid of first. So this is what they do. The low income earners are forced into situations where they're consuming genetically modified food, and then it goes gradually up the food chain from there. And the financial system also works very well and very effectively for the depopulation program, because all you really have to do is marginalise people to the extent where they become homeless. And once they're homeless, they usually end up in the prison system anyway. And once you're in the prison system, then it's very easy to discard people from within the prison system. Of course, you can sterilise them while they're in there by feeding them GM food. And they really don't have a choice in the matter because they're in prison. And these are all part of the same agenda, folks. And then, of course, we can also do it to other countries that are in states of hardship, such as Haiti or Indonesia, or anyone who's had an earthquake or any type of a tsunami or some type of natural disaster. We can easily just ship GM food off to them as well and effectively sterilise another entire population via the aid package that we've sent them. And you see, this is why it's so imperative that people get informed about GM food, and why people press their governments to make sure that all GM food is labelled. And if you have a government that says, well, look, I don't think we really need to label it, then you need to understand that your government is supporting the depopulation agenda, and you need to express a loss of confidence in that government and have that government removed from power for being in abusive office as quickly as possible. But you see, ultimately, folks, with all of this, the bottom line is that we know this is all happening, and all supported by the criminals that we have in power in all of our governments. And this happens because we don't realise the power that we have. And we continue to follow these ridiculous pieces of legislation that these criminals give us. They write rules on pieces of paper and they say, you must follow these rules, and if you don't, you're a criminal. When really all they've done is abuse their power, abuse their position of office, and commit a crime by even writing such legislation. That's the problem, folks. The question is, how much are people prepared to take, and how much are people going to continue to back down in the face of such corrupt legislation that we're seeing from these people?